The judge looked down at the woman in the frayed cardigan and asked, "Mrs. Thorne, do you have legal representation?" The entire courtroom snickered. Her ex-husband, Marcus, leaned over to his mistress and whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch, "She can't even afford a bus ticket, let alone a lawyer." They thought this was the end of her. They thought they were watching a homeless woman being evicted from her life. But they didn't know that the woman standing in that $20 dress was silently wearing a watch worth more than the entire courthouse. They didn't know that in exactly 20 minutes the doors would open and the world would learn that Sandra wasn't the victim. She was the owner. This is the story of the most brutal courtroom revenge in history. The hallway outside courtroom 304 of the Superior Court of California smelled of floor wax and desperation. It was a smell Sandra Vance had become intimately familiar with over the last 6 months. But today, the scent seemed sharper, more acrid. Sandra sat on a hard wooden bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a faded grey cardigan she had bought at a thrift store in reckless disregard for fashion, paired with a simple black skirt that had seen better days. Her shoes were sensible, scuffed flats. To anyone walking by, hurried clerks with towering stacks of files, police officers drinking lukewarm coffee. She looked like a woman defeated by life. She looked like exactly what her ex-husband said she was, a leech, a failure, a nobody. "Look at her," a voice sneered, cutting through the hum of the hallway. "It's actually pathetic. I almost feel bad. Almost." Sandra didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew the voice belonged to Chloe St. James. Chloe was 24, a model for a mid-tier athletic brand, and currently the woman wearing a diamond ring that used to sit on Sandra's finger. Metaphorically speaking, Marcus had actually bought Chloe a bigger one, financed by the credit lines he had opened in Sandra's name without her knowing. "Don't waste your pity, babe," Marcus Thorne said. His voice was a rich baritone, the kind that closed deals and charmed investors. He walked into Sandra's peripheral vision. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit from Savile Row, tailored to hide the slight paunch of a man who drank too much scotch. Sandra loves the victim act. It's her only talent. Sandra finally looked up. Her face was bare of makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. Her eyes, however, were clear. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. Marcus laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He turned to the man standing next to him, Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a partner at Pendleton, Kravitz & Moore, one of the most expensive family law firms in San Francisco. "Arthur, did you see the filing she submitted?" Marcus asked, gesturing at Sandra as if she were a piece of furniture. "She hand-wrote her financial declaration. Hand-wrote it. Because she couldn't afford a printer cartridge." Arthur Pendleton adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, looking down at Sandra with professional disdain. "It's certainly irregular, Mrs. Thorne. But don't worry. We'll make sure the judge sees the reality of the situation. We're asking for a full dismissal of alimony based on fraudulent pretense of poverty." "Fraudulent?" Sandra repeated, her voice steady. "You're hiding cash, Sandra," Marcus spat, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "Somewhere. I know you siphoned off grocery money. Maybe you have a few grand tucked in a mattress. It doesn't matter. I'm going to crush you today. I'm taking the house, the car, and I'm going to sue you for legal fees. You'll be on the street by nearly noon." Chloe giggled, clinging to Marcus's arm. "We're going to turn the master bedroom into a gym, Sandra. Just thought you should know." Sandra felt a muscle in her jaw twitch, but she forced herself to breathe. They saw a broken woman. They saw the wife who had stayed home for 5 years, supporting Marcus while he built his tech consultancy firm, Thorn Dynamics. They saw the woman who cooked the meals, cleaned the shirts, and hosted the dinner parties that won him clients. They didn't see the truth. They didn't know that Sandra Vance was a truncated version of her full legal name. They didn't know that before she met Marcus, she had been the silent architect behind Vanguard Systems, a shadowy cybersecurity firm sold to the government for $4 billion 6 years ago. She had walked away from the public eye, craving a simple life, a life where someone loved her for her, not her net worth. She had set up a blind trust, the Sterling Vance Trust, managed by a private office in Zurich, and lived off a salary she generated from a small freelance design business. She had fallen in love with Marcus because he seemed driven and passionate. She hadn't told him about the money because she wanted to be sure, and by the time she realized he was a narcissist who loved money more than anything, it was too late. She had played the role of the struggling wife to see if he had any redeemable qualities. When he filed for divorce and tried to leave her destitute, she decided to keep playing the role. Until today. "Enjoy the gym, Chloe," Sandra said, her voice dropping an octave. "I hear the lighting in that room is very unforgiving." Chloe's face reddened. "You bitch!" "Save it for the judge," Arthur Pendleton interrupted, checking his Rolex. "It's time. Let's go finish this." Marcus straightened his tie, sneering at Sandra one last time. "Do yourself a favor. Don't cry when the gavel bangs. It's embarrassing." They swept into the courtroom, a phalanx of confidence and expensive cologne. Sandra remained on the bench for 10 seconds longer. She reached into her battered tote bag and touched the cold, sleek surface of a black satellite phone. It vibrated once. A text message. "The asset is secured. We are 5 minutes out." Sandra stood up, smoothed her $20 skirt, and walked into the lion's den. Courtroom 304 was sterile, bathed in harsh fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly sickly. The Honorable Judge William Holloway sat on the bench. He was a man known for his impatience and his bias toward efficiency. He hated long, drawn-out divorces. Marcus and his legal team occupied the right side of the room. They had spread out their files, laptops, and water pitchers like they were preparing for a corporate takeover. Marcus sat with his legs crossed, whispering to Chloe, who was seated in the gallery directly behind him, breaking protocol but ignored by the bailiff. Sandra sat alone at the left table. No paralegals, no laptop, just a single notepad and a cheap ballpoint pen. "Case number 49201, Thorn v. Thorn," the clerk announced. Judge Holloway peered over his spectacles. "I see Mr. Pendleton is representing the petitioner and the respondent. Mrs. Thorn, you are still appearing pro se? Representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sandra said, standing up. Her voice was quiet but carried to the back of the room. "Mrs. Thorn, I warned you last week." Judge Holloway sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Pendleton is a shark. I cannot offer you legal advice. If you proceed without counsel, you do so at your own peril." "I understand, Your Honor. I cannot afford counsel," she lied. Or rather, the Sandra Marcus knew couldn't afford it. Arthur Pendleton stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, if I may. This claim of poverty is exactly why we are here. My client, Mr. Thorn, has been generous. He offered a settlement of $10,000 and a grace period of 30 days to vacate the marital residence. Mrs. Thorn refused. She is wasting the court's time in a bid to extort more money from a man she has emotionally abused for years." "Objection," Sandra said softly. "Grounds?" the judge asked, surprised she knew the word. "Relevance. And perjury." Marcus laughed out loud. The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Mr. Thorne, control yourself. Pendleton smirked. Your Honor, we are moving for an immediate summary judgment. We have evidence that Mrs. Thorne contributed 0 financial assets to the marriage. The house was purchased in my client's name. The cars are in his name. Thorne Dynamics was incorporated solely by him. She has been, for lack of a better term, a passenger. A freeloader. Chloe coughed from the back. The judge shot Chloe a withering look, but turned back to Sandra. Mrs. Thorne, do you have any documentation to refute the claim that you have no stake in the marital assets? Sandra looked down at her notepad. She was stalling. She needed 3 more minutes. Your Honor, Sandra began, her hands trembling slightly, a performance she had perfected. I supported Marcus while he built that company. I paid the rent on our first apartment with my freelance wages. I designed the logo for Thorne Dynamics. I wrote the initial business plan. Hearsay and irrelevant, Pendleton cut in smoothly. Did you sign a partnership agreement? No. Is your name on the deed? No. This is California, but without commingling of substantial assets, and given the prenuptial agreement. The prenup was signed under duress, Sandra said. The prenup, Pendleton boomed, waving a document, limits your alimony to 0 if the marriage lasts less than 10 years. You were married for 5. You get nothing. We are doing you a favor by offering the 10,000. Take it and leave. The air in the room was suffocating. Marcus was grinning, a predator watching a wounded deer. He leaned over to Pendleton. Ask her about the jewelry. Make her admit she sold the necklace I gave her. Pendleton nodded. Mrs. Thorne, isn't it true you recently sold a diamond necklace gifted by my client to a pawn shop on 6th Street for $500? Is this how you manage assets? Sandra looked at Marcus. I sold it to buy groceries because you froze the joint checking account. So you admit to misappropriating marital gifts? Pendleton pressed. Your Honor, she is financially irresponsible. We ask for the house to be vacated immediately. Tonight. Judge Holloway looked at Sandra. He looked tired. Mrs. Thorne, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Pendleton. The law is clear on the prenup. Unless you can present a compelling reason why the contract is invalid, I am going to rule in favor of the petitioner. Marcus fist-pumped under the table. It was over. He had won. He had discarded the boring wife for the younger model, kept all his money, and humiliated her in the process. I do have a compelling reason, Sandra said. She checked the wall clock. 10 Maudla Bourse, a.m. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud boom. The sound was so forceful that the bailiff jumped, reaching for his belt. 3 men walked in. They were not normal lawyers. They were dressed in charcoal grey suits that cost more than Marcus's car. They carried leather briefcases stamped with a gold emblem that Arthur Pendleton recognized immediately, causing the blood to drain from his face. The man in the lead was older, with silver hair and a terrifyingly calm demeanor. He walked with a cane that had a silver handle shaped like a falcon. Who are you? Judge Holloway demanded, banging his gavel. You cannot just barge into my courtroom. The silver-haired man ignored the gallery, ignored Marcus, and walked straight to Sandra's table. He placed a briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and pulled out a single thick document bound in blue velvet. He turned to the judge and bowed slightly. Apologies for the intrusion, Your Honor, the man said. His voice was like gravel and honey. I am Alistair Sterling, senior partner at Sterling, Cromwell and Davis of New York and London. The room went silent. Sterling, Cromwell and Davis wasn't a law firm you hired for a divorce. It was a firm you hired to buy countries. It was the firm that represented the royal family and the World Bank. Arthur Pendleton stammered. Mr. Sterling, what are you doing here? Alistair Sterling didn't even look at Pendleton. He turned to Sandra. Madam, he said, bowing his head deeply to the woman in the $20 cardigan. The board of directors has been convened. The acquisition is complete. We are ready to proceed with the liquidation of the subsidiary. Sandra stood up. Her posture changed instantly. The slump was gone. Her chin rose. The shy, battered wife vanished, replaced by a woman who radiated cold, absolute power. Thank you, Alistair, Sandra said, her voice crisp and commanding. Please, introduce yourself to the court. Alistair turned to the stunned judge. Your Honor, I am not here to represent Mrs. Thorne in a divorce proceeding. I am here to represent the Helios Group, the parent company that holds the blind trust of this woman. He pointed a manicured finger at Marcus, who was looking pale. And I am here to inform the court, Alistair continued, that as of 9 o'clock this morning, the defendant, Mrs. Sandra Vance Sterling, has purchased the outstanding debt and majority shares of Thorne Dynamics. Marcus stood up, his chair clattering back. What? That's impossible. She's broke. Sandra turned to Marcus. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. Sit down, Marcus, she said. I didn't want your money. I have plenty of my own. I just bought your company, and now I'm going to audit it. The silence in courtroom 304 was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments of national tragedy or divine intervention. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, his face draining of color until it matched the pristine white of his dress shirt. You bought my company, Marcus whispered. His voice cracked, stripping away the confident baritone he used to bully waiters and subordinates. That's illegal. You can't do that. It's a marital asset. Alistair Sterling stepped forward, his cane clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. He didn't address Marcus. He addressed the judge, treating Marcus as if he were a minor annoyance, like a fly buzzing near a wedding cake. Your Honor, Alistair said, opening the blue velvet document. To be precise, the Helios Group purchased the distressed debt of Thorne Dynamics from Silicon Valley Bank and 2 private venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road. We also acquired 51% of the voting shares via a shell corporation that Mr. Thorne himself courted for investment 3 weeks ago. Marcus grabbed the table for support. Wait. Omega Holdings? That was you? Sandra finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were devoid of the fear he had thrived on for 5 years. You were so desperate for cash to fund Chloe's lifestyle and your new Porsche, Marcus. You didn't vet the investors. You just saw the check. This is entrapment, Arthur Pendleton shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. He was already mentally calculating how to distance himself from this sinking ship. My client was manipulated. Your client, Alistair corrected icily, sold equity in his company to a willing buyer. The fact that he did not know the buyer was effectively his wife is a failure of his own due diligence, not a legal error. And regarding the marital assets, Alistair pulled a second document from his briefcase. Mr. Thorne claimed earlier that Mrs. Thorne brought nothing to the marriage. However, I have here the original incorporation documents of Thorne Dynamics. Clause 4, subsection B, intellectual property assigned to the company by Sandra Vance is valued at... Well, let's just say the initial valuation of her code was $3 million. She opted not to take shares then, to let Marcus feel like the big man. But legally, she owns the foundation the company is built on. Judge Halloway adjusted his glasses, reading the documents Alistair had placed before him. He looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to a sort of grim amusement. Mr. Pendleton, the judge said. "It appears your client has significantly misrepresented his financial standing and the contributions of his wife. If she owns the debt, she essentially owns him." "I want a recess," Marcus screamed, losing his composure entirely. "She's lying! She shops at Goodwill. Look at her clothes." Sandra stood up slowly. She walked around the table, approaching the gallery where Chloe sat. The young model was shrinking into her seat, terrified by the sudden shift in energy. "Do you know why I shop at Goodwill, Marcus?" Sandra asked, her voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Because I don't need clothes to prove I have worth. I don't need a logo on my chest to know who I am. I spent 5 years watching you spend money we didn't have to impress people who didn't like you." She stopped in front of Marcus. He towered over her physically, but emotionally, he was on his knees. "I tried to help you," she said. "I tried to get you to save. I tried to get you to run the business honestly. But you called me a nag. You called me small-minded. You said you needed a woman who understood luxury." She glanced at Chloe. "You found her, and to keep her, you embezzled money from the company accounts, didn't you?" The room gasped. "Objection!" Pendleton roared. "That is a baseless accusation of a crime." "Is it?" Sandra pulled a small, folded piece of paper from her pocket, the same pocket that held the satellite phone. "This is a transaction log from the Cayman Islands, a shell account named Blue Orchid. $400,000 transferred last Tuesday, the same day you told the court you couldn't afford alimony." Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. Judge Holloway banged his gavel. "Enough! I am granting a continuance on the divorce proceedings, pending a full forensic audit of Mr. Thorne's finances. However, based on the evidence of potential fraud presented, I am freezing all of Mr. Thorne's personal assets immediately. His passports are to be surrendered." "What?" Marcus choked out. "You can't freeze my accounts. I have a mortgage. I have lease payments." "Then I suggest you ask your new boss for an advance," the judge said dryly, nodding at Sandra. "Court is adjourned." As the gavel banged, the spell broke. Bailiffs moved toward Marcus to collect his passport. Reporters who had been lurking in the back, expecting a boring divorce hearing, were now frantically typing on their phones. Sandra didn't stay to watch Marcus beg. She turned to Alistair. "Is the car ready?" "Waiting at the curb, madam." "The Rolls-Royce Phantom." "I had it flown in from London." "Good," Sandra said. She looked at her $20 cardigan one last time, then took it off, revealing a simple black silk blouse underneath. She dropped the cardigan on the bench. "Let's go to the office. I have a company to clean up." As she walked out, the double doors swung open, and the flash of paparazzi cameras blinded the hallway. Marcus Thorne watched her leave, realizing too late that the shadow he had cast over her was the only thing that had kept him hidden from the sun. And now he was about to burn. The drive to the headquarters of Thorne Dynamics took 20 minutes. It was a glass and steel monolith in the heart of the financial district, a building Marcus had leased to stroke his ego, despite the company not needing that much space. Sandra sat in the back of the Phantom, watching the city roll by. Alistair sat opposite her, pouring a glass of sparkling water. "The transition team is already in the building," Alistair said. "Security has been briefed. They answer to you now. We've locked Marcus out of the server room, remotely using the back doors you installed in the code 5 years ago." Sandra smiled faintly. "He never did update the security protocols, did he?" "He was too busy buying boats," Alistair noted. "Madam, I must ask, are you ready for this? The staff, they know you as the nagging wife who sometimes brought cookies. They don't know Sandra Sterling." "They will," she said. The car pulled up to the curb. Usually, Marcus parked his Porsche right in front of the entrance, in a no-parking zone, daring the city to ticket him. Today, the curb was clear. A security guard named Miller was standing by the revolving doors. He was a good man, one of the few who had treated Sandra with kindness when she used to visit. He looked confused as the massive black car with diplomatic flags rolled up. The chauffeur opened the door. Sandra stepped out. She wasn't wearing the skirt and blouse anymore. In the car, she had changed into a cream-colored power suit from Armani, paired with sunglasses that cost more than Miller's monthly rent. She looked like a CEO. She looked like war. "Mrs. Thorne?" Miller asked, squinting. "It's Miss Vance, Miller," she said, removing her sunglasses. "Or Ms. Sterling. We're still deciding on the branding. How is your daughter's tuition coming along?" Miller stammered. Good, ma'am. Thank you for asking." "Good. You're getting a raise today. Triple time for the next few hours. Don't let Marcus Thorne into the building until I say so." Miller's eyes went wide. "Yes, ma'am." Sandra swept into the lobby. The receptionist, a woman named Jessica, who had frequently rolled her eyes at Sandra and covered for Marcus's affairs, was on the phone. She looked up, annoyed, then froze. "Where is the executive team?" Sandra asked, not stopping. In the conference room, but you can't go up there," Marcus said. "Marcus doesn't work here anymore," Sandra said, pressing the elevator button. "And if you want to keep your job, Jessica, I suggest you find the files on the marketing expenses for the last 2 years and have them on my desk in 10 minutes. Jessica dropped the phone. The elevator ride was smooth. When the doors opened on the top floor, the atmosphere was chaotic. The news from the courthouse had leaked. Phones were ringing off the hook. Executives were huddling in corners. They all stopped when Sandra walked in, flanked by Alistair and 2 large security contractors. She walked straight to the main conference room. The glass walls allowed her to see inside. The CFO, the COO, and the VP of sales, Marcus's bros, were arguing loudly. Sandra pushed the door open. "Gentlemen," she said. They turned. The VP of sales, a man named Greg, who had once hit on Sandra at a Christmas party while Marcus was in the bathroom, sneered. "Sandra? What are you doing here?" "Look, we heard about the court thing, but you need to leave. This is a place of business." Sandra walked to the head of the table, Marcus's chair. It was a custom leather ergonomic chair that looked like a throne. She pulled it out and sat down. "Get out of the chair, Sandra," the CFO snapped. "Security." "I am security," Alistair said from the doorway, his voice low and dangerous. Sandra placed her hands on the mahogany table. "Greg, you're fired." Greg laughed. "You can't fire me. You're a housewife." "I am the majority shareholder," Sandra said. "And I've seen your expense reports, the strip clubs in Vegas, the client dinners that were actually ski trips, fraud, all of it." She tossed a folder onto the table. It slid across and hit Greg in the chest. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk before I call the FBI. The choice is yours, unemployment or prison." Greg opened the folder. His face turned grey. He didn't say a word. He stood up and ran out of the room. The other 2 executives sat down slowly, terrified. "Now," Sandra said, pivoting in the chair, "let's talk about the actual product. Because for the last 3 years, this company has been selling vaporware." Just then, the elevator dinged. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. "Where is she?" Marcus's voice boomed. He burst into the conference room, his tie undone, sweat dripping down his forehead. He had sprinted from the taxi because his accounts were frozen and his Uber app had been declined. Chloe was trailing behind him, looking like a lost child. "Get out of my chair!" Marcus screamed, rushing toward her. The 2 security contractors blocked him instantly, forming a wall of muscle. "Marcus," Sandra said, leaning back and steepling her fingers. "You're late for the board meeting, but that's all right. We were just discussing your severance package." "This is my company. I built this," Marcus spat, straining against the guards. "You built a facade," Sandra corrected. "I wrote the code. I designed the architecture. I secured the first contracts. You just took the credit. And then you took the money." She stood up and walked around the table until she was face to face with him, separated only by the guards. "I'm dissolving the board, Marcus. I'm taking the company private under the Helios umbrella. And as for you..." She looked at Chloe, who was trembling. "Chloe," Sandra said softly, "did he tell you he bought the condo you're living in?" Chloe nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes." "He didn't," Sandra said. "He leased it. In the company's name. It's corporate housing. And since I am now the owner of the corporation, I'm afraid I'm evicting you. You have 24 hours. Chloe let out a sob and turned on Marcus, slapping him across the face. "You liar! You said you owned it outright." Marcus ignored Chloe. He stared at Sandra with pure hatred. "Why?" he rasped. "Why go to all this trouble? Why not just divorce me?" Sandra leaned in close, so only he could hear. "Because you didn't just break my heart, Marcus. You mocked my existence. You tried to erase me. You thought I was weak because I was kind. I wanted to show you that kindness is a choice, not a weakness. And when you abuse it, you get the monster." She turned to the guards. "Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building and make sure he returns his keycard. It's a security risk." As Marcus was dragged out, shouting obscenities, the entire office staff watched in silence. Sandra stood in the center of the room, taking a deep breath. She wasn't just Sandra, the ex-wife, anymore. She was the queen. But the war wasn't over. Marcus was desperate, and desperate men did dangerous things. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you forgot about the Cayman accounts. If I go down, I'm taking your precious reputation with me." Sandra frowned. She looked at Alistair. "He has a backup plan," she said. Alistair narrowed his eyes. "Then we must crush that too." Rain began to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite at Thorne Dynamics. The city of San Francisco was disappearing behind a veil of grey mist, mirroring the storm brewing inside the server room 3 floors below. Sandra sat in Marcus's leather chair, which she had already ordered to be reupholstered. Her laptop was open, connected directly to the mainframe. Alistair stood by the window, watching the street below, where a news van had just pulled up. "The press is circling," Alistair noted. "The story of a homeless housewife buying a tech company in court is viral, as they say." "Let them circle," Sandra murmured, her eyes scanning lines of code cascading down her screen. "I have bigger problems. Marcus didn't just embezzle money. He installed a dead man's switch." "Explain," Alistair said, turning sharply. "It's a logic bomb," Sandra typed furiously, her fingers a blur. He knew he was playing with fire using the company funds. So, he hired a third-party contractor, looks like someone from the Eastern Bloc based on the syntax, to write a script. If Marcus doesn't log in every 48 hours to reset a counter, the system automatically begins deleting the source code. It wipes the servers, irreversibly. And when was the last login? Sandra checked the timestamp. Her face went pale. "Yesterday morning. We have 4 hours before Thorne Dynamics becomes a hollow shell. The intellectual property, the client data, the backups, it all goes. Can you stop it?" "I wrote the original architecture, Alistair. I can stop anything," she said, her voice hard. but he's encrypted the trigger mechanism with a 256-bit key. I can bypass it, but it will take time I don't have. Or... She stopped. A chat window popped up on the main monitor. It was a secure, encrypted messaging app that had been installed on the system's root level. User. Kingham has entered the chat. Sandra stared at the screen. He's watching. He knows I'm in the system. Kingham. Like the new decor. I hear you fired Greg. Bold move. Sandra typed back. Give me the decryption key, Marcus. Kingham. Not for free. You embarrassed me, Sandra. You took my life. You took my reputation. Now I hold the cards. You want the company? It's going to cost you $50 million. Wire it to the Cayman account in the next 3 hours, or I let the clock run out. You'll be the queen of nothing. Alistair leaned over the screen. He's blackmailing you. We can trace this. He's using a VPN chain, Sandra said, analyzing the signal. He's bouncing through Russia, Singapore, and Brazil. It'll take the NSA a week to find him. We have 3 hours. Sandra closed her eyes. She thought about the last 5 years. The way Marcus would sigh when she asked for money for a haircut. The way he would leave his dirty dishes in the sink, expecting them to vanish. The way he looked at her in the courtroom, like she was dirt. He thought this was about money. He thought he could squeeze her because she cared about the company. But he had forgotten who she was before she was Mrs. Thorne. He had forgotten that Sandra Vance was the woman who built Vanguard, the system that protected the Federal Reserve. Alistair, Sandra said, opening her eyes. Call the cleaners. Alistair raised an eyebrow. Are you sure, madam? That is a path we cannot walk back from. Once we activate the grey market assets. He wants to play cyber-terrorist, Sandra said, a cold smile touching her lips. Then I'll treat him like one. Initiate the ghost protocol. She turned back to the chat. Sandra. I don't negotiate with terrorists, Marcus, and I certainly don't negotiate with amateurs. Kingham. Amateur? I have your finger on the trigger. Tick-tock, Sandra. Sandra minimized the chat window and opened a terminal command line. She wasn't going to defuse the bomb. She was going to find the person holding the detonator. She began typing a script she hadn't used in 6 years. It was a tracer algorithm, illegal in 40 countries, designed to pierce through VPN tunnels by overloading the localized nodes with packet data. It was aggressive, loud, and dangerous. Finding you now, she whispered. On the screen, a map of the world appeared. Red dots lit up. Singapore, Brazil, Russia, then vanished as her algorithm smashed through the masking layers. Target locking. Target locking. The final dot blinked red. It wasn't in the Caymans. It wasn't in Europe. He's in Oakland, Sandra said. The Starbird Motel off the I-880. Room 14. Alistair checked his watch. I will have the security team ready in 10 minutes. No, Sandra said, standing up. She grabbed her purse. He knows the security team. He'll see them coming and trigger the delete command manually. He needs to see me. He needs to think he won. Madam, that is dangerous. It's necessary. Get the car, Alistair, and bring the jammer. The Starbird Motel was a place where dreams went to die, usually accompanied by the sound of passing highway traffic and the smell of stale cigarette smoke. It was 1 p.m. when the Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. Sandra stepped out. She had removed her blazer, rolling up the sleeves of her silk blouse. She carried a small aluminum briefcase. Alistair walked beside her, carrying a device that looked like a thick radio, a military-grade signal jammer. Keep the jammer off until I give the signal, Sandra instructed. If we cut his internet connection too early, the dead man's switch might trigger automatically as a fail-safe. They walked up the rusted stairs to the second floor. Room 14 had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging crookedly on the knob. Sandra didn't knock. She kicked the door. The lock, flimsy and rusted, gave way with a splintering crack. The door swung open. Marcus was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress, a laptop balanced on his knees, a bottle of cheap vodka on the nightstand. He jumped, nearly dropping the computer. "Sandra!" he screamed, scrambling back against the headboard. "You crazy bitch! I almost pressed the button!" The room smelled of sweat and fear. Takeout containers were scattered on the floor. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie missing. Sandra walked into the room, calm and collected. Alistair stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. "You look terrible, Marcus," Sandra said, placing the aluminum briefcase on the small, wobbly table near the TV. "I look like a man who's about to be rich," Marcus snarled, regaining some bravado. He tapped his finger on the enter key of his laptop. "One press, that's all it takes. And Thorn Dynamics is zeroed out. No product, no data, just empty drives." "And then you go to prison for corporate sabotage and extortion," Sandra said. "I'm already leaving the country." Marcus laughed, though it sounded manic. "I have a flight to Belize in 4 hours, but I need the cash first. Did you bring it?" Sandra tapped the briefcase. "I brought something better." "Money! I want money!" "Open it," Sandra challenged. Marcus hesitated. He kept one hand hovering over his keyboard. If this is a trick... Curiosity killed the cat, Marcus, but satisfaction brought it back. Marcus reached out with his trembling left hand and flipped the latches of the briefcase. He opened the lid. It wasn't filled with cash. It was empty, save for a single file folder. "What is this?" Marcus spat. "It's your life, Marcus," Sandra said softly. She took a step closer. "Inside that folder is the forensic accounting of the last 5 years. But not just the money you stole from me. It contains the logs of the Vanguard protocol." Marcus froze. "Vanguard? What are you talking about?" "You never asked me about my past," Sandra said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You never asked where I learned to code. You assumed I was just a freelancer. But Thorn Dynamics, the code base I wrote for you, it wasn't new. It was a diluted version of Vanguard, a cybersecurity system I built for the NSA." Marcus blinked, his brain trying to catch up. You worked for the NSA?" "I owned the contract that supplied the NSA," she corrected. "And when you installed that dead man's switch, Marcus, you didn't just threaten a private company. You attempted to tamper with code that is technically classified as a weapon of national defense." Sandra pulled a chair over and sat down, crossing her legs. "See, the FBI handles embezzlement. But tampering with Vanguard code? That falls under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security. And they don't do trials, Marcus. They do black sites." Marcus looked at his laptop screen. "You're lying. You're just trying to scare me." "Am I?" Sandra pointed to the window. "Alistair, the signal." Alistair flipped the switch on the jammer. A low hum filled the room. On Marcus's laptop, the Wi-Fi icon turned to a red X. "No!" Marcus screamed. "You cut the connection, the failsafe. It's going to delete everything." He stared at the screen, waiting for the deletion progress bar to appear, waiting for the code to vanish. Nothing happened. The screen simply refreshed. A new window popped up. A video feed. It was a video of Sandra, sitting in her office 10 minutes ago. In the video she was typing a command. Override command, Alpha 70, authorization E. Vance. On the screen in the motel room, the text flashed. Threat neutralized. Dead man's switch isolated and sandboxed. Marcus stared at the screen. It didn't execute. I patched the vulnerability while we were driving here, Sandra said. I didn't need to stop the timer. I just needed to redirect the command to a dummy drive. You deleted a folder of cat pictures, Marcus. Congratulations. Marcus slumped against the wall. The fight drained out of him. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a greedy man who had picked a fight with a god. So what now? Marcus whispered. You call the police? No, Sandra said, standing up. Police are public, and I value my privacy. If I have you arrested, my identity as the creator of Vanguard enters the public record. I can't have that. She walked over to him, looming over his pathetic form. I'm offering you a deal. Marcus looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. A deal? You are going to leave the country, Sandra said, but not to Belize, and not with $50 million. She pulled a single envelope from her pocket and tossed it onto the bed. That is a one-way ticket to Bangkok, coach, and a debit card with $5,000 on it. 5,000? Marcus cried. That's nothing. It's 5,000 more than you deserve. You will go to Thailand. You will never return to the United States. You will never speak my name. You will never mention Thorn Dynamics or Vanguard. And if I refuse? Sandra signaled Alistair. Alistair stepped forward. Then, Mr. Thorn, I turn off the jammer, and the automated alert I set up, the one that notifies the Department of Defense that a hostile actor has possession of classified code, goes through. They are currently 5 minutes away, waiting for my signal. Marcus looked at the jammer. He looked at Sandra's cold, unyielding face. He realized, finally, the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't married a housewife. He had married a titan. He grabbed the envelope. I'll go, he whispered. Good, Sandra said. The car is waiting outside to take you to the airport. Don't miss your flight. She turned and walked out of the dingy motel room, the air already feeling cleaner. As they walked back to the Rolls-Royce, Alistair deactivated the jammer. Was the Department of Defense really 5 minutes away? Alistair asked, a hint of a smile in his voice. No, Sandra admitted, sliding into the leather-back seat. But he didn't know that. Fear is a much better motivator than reality. A masterstroke, madam. It's not over yet, Alistair, Sandra said, looking out the window as the sun began to break through the rain. Marcus was a symptom, but during the audit, I found something else. Someone was funding Marcus's legal fees. Someone who knew exactly who I was. Alistair stiffened. Who? A shell company called Obsidian Corp, Sandra said. And I know who runs it. My old partner from Vanguard, the one who wanted to sell the code to the highest bidder. Silas Vane, Alistair breathed. He's back, Sandra said. And he used Marcus to try and flush me out. Marcus failed, which means Silas is coming for me himself. 3 weeks after Marcus Thorn boarded a one-way flight to Bangkok, the skyline of San Francisco was lit up by the spotlight beams of the Sterling Gala. It was the event of the decade, the rebranding of Thorn Dynamics into Vanguard Prime. The press was calling it the Phoenix Rising. Every tech billionaire, politician, and socialite who mattered was in attendance. They weren't there for the champagne. They were there to see her, the mysterious ex-wife who had toppled a CEO and revealed herself as a billionaire ghost. Sandra stood on the balcony of the penthouse ballroom, looking down at the city. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered like the night sky, diamonds resting against her throat, diamonds she had bought herself. He's here, Alistair said, stepping out onto the balcony. He didn't look at her. He scanned the crowd below with professional paranoia. I know, Sandra said, sipping her drink. I sent him an invitation. Madam, Inviting Silas Vane to your relaunch is like inviting a wolf to a nursery. He funded Marcus's legal team. He tried to destroy you. Silas is a narcissist, Alistair. If I hadn't invited him, he would have broken in. This way, I control the environment. Is the encryption key ready? It is loaded onto the drive in your purse, but I strongly advise against giving it to him. Sandra turned, her eyes flashing. Trust me. She walked back into the ballroom. The noise of the crowd dipped as she entered. Whispers followed her like a wake behind a ship. That's her, the one who ruined Marcus. Is it true she worked for the NSA? She moved through the crowd with a grace she had suppressed for years. She shook hands with senators. She nodded at competitors. But her eyes were fixed on the far side of the room, near the ice sculpture. Silas Vane stood there. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble, cold, sharp, and expensive. He wore a tuxedo that fit too perfectly. He was sipping a martini, watching her approach with a predator's smile. "Sandra," Silas said, his voice smooth as oil. "Or should I call you Mrs. Thorne?" "No, that name never really suited you, did it?" "Hello, Silas," Sandra replied, stopping 2 feet away. "I see you got my invitation. I'm surprised you came out of the shadows. Obsidian Corp usually prefers to operate in the dark." "I make exceptions for old friends," Silas said, stepping closer. The air between them crackled with tension. "And we are friends, aren't we? We built the foundation of the modern world together. Until you developed a conscience and ran away to play house with that idiot Marcus." "Marcus was a mistake," Sandra admitted. "But he served a purpose. He taught me that hiding my strength doesn't protect me. It just invites parasites." Silas chuckled. "A harsh lesson, but effective." "Speaking of Marcus, it was fun watching him squirm. I gave him just enough rope to hang himself, hoping it would drag you out. And it worked. Here you are, the Queen of Tech." "What do you want, Silas?" Sandra asked, her voice dropping. "You know what I want," he hissed, the smile vanishing. "I want the Vanguard source key, the master back door to the banking system, the one you took with you when you left the agency, the one you hid inside Thorne Dynamics' messy code." "It's too dangerous, Silas. That key can destabilize global currencies. It's not a product. It's a weapon." "Exactly," Silas whispered. "And I have a buyer in Shanghai willing to pay 10 billion for it. Give me the drive, Sandra, or I destroy everything you've just rebuilt." "How?" Silas tapped his watch. "I have operatives in the server room right now. Not the digital one, the physical one in the basement. They have planted thermite charges on the cooling systems. If I don't send a cancel code in 5 minutes, this building and everyone in it won't blow up, but the heat spike will melt every hard drive in the building. Your legacy will be ash. Again." Sandra stared at him. "You're bluffing. Try me. You have everything to lose now. You're public. You're a CEO. Imagine the headline: Billionaire's launch party ends in catastrophic failure. Give me the drive." Sandra looked around the room, the laughter, the clinking glasses. She looked back at Silas. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a sleek, silver USB drive. "You win," she whispered, her hand trembling. Silas's eyes lit up with greed. He snatched the drive from her hand. "Smart girl," he grinned. "Always the pragmatist." He plugged the drive into a small tablet he pulled from his jacket pocket. He typed furiously, verifying the code. "It's authentic," he muttered, breathless. "The ghost key. I have it." He looked up at Sandra, triumph radiating from him. "Pleasure doing business, Sandra. I've cancelled the thermite command. Enjoy your party." He turned to leave, heading for the exit. "Silas," Sandra called out. He stopped and looked back. "Aren't you going to check the compile date?" she asked. Silas frowned. What? The code on that drive. Check the compile date. Silas looked down at his tablet. He navigated to the metadata. Compile date. Today, 18 as hours. His face fell. This is new code. This isn't the original Vanguard key. No, Sandra said, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. It's a beacon. A beacon! Suddenly the music stopped. The heavy doors of the ballroom burst open. Federal agents, nobody move! A dozen tactical officers in FBI windbreakers swarmed the room, weapons drawn. But they weren't pointing them at the crowd. They were pointing them at Silas. What is this? Silas screamed, backing away. Sandra, what did you do? Sandra walked toward him, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. You thought I hid the Vanguard key in this building? She laughed softly. Silas, I destroyed the Vanguard key 6 years ago. I wrote a patch that closed the back door. It doesn't exist anymore. But the drive contained a rootkit, Sandra explained. The moment you plugged it into your tablet, it uploaded your entire Obsidian Corp database to the FBI server. Every illegal trade, every blackmail scheme, every transaction you made to fund Marcus's legal team. It's all public record now. Silas looked at the tablet in his hands, as if it were a poisonous snake. He dropped it, but it was too late. Silas Vane, an agent shouted, cuffing him. You are under arrest for cyber-terrorism, corporate espionage, and treason. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, Silas locked eyes with Sandra one last time. You're a witch, he screamed. I'm an engineer, she corrected. The room was silent as the FBI took him out. Then slowly, Alistair started to clap. One by one, the investors, the politicians, and the tech giants joined in. The applause grew until it was a thunderous roar. Sandra stood in the center of the ballroom, the applause washing over her. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't the ex-wife. She raised her glass. To the future, she said. 6 months later, the sun was setting over the Andaman Sea in Thailand. Marcus Thorne wiped sweat from his forehead. He was wearing a stained apron, standing behind a street cart that sold fried noodles. The heat was oppressive, and his feet hurt. Hey, 2 noodles, spicy, a tourist shouted, snapping his fingers at Marcus. Coming right up, Marcus muttered, forcing a smile. He scraped the wok, the grease popping onto his hand. He hissed in pain. Behind the tourist, a large television screen in a bar was playing CNN International, and in tech news, Vanguard Prime stock soared to an all-time high today as CEO Sandra Sterling announced a new global cybersecurity initiative. Sterling, recently named Person of the Year, had this to say. Marcus looked up. There she was, on the screen. She looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. She was wearing a white suit, smiling at the camera, a smile he had never seen when they were married. Hey, noodles! Now! The tourist yelled. Marcus looked at the screen one last time, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at the woman he had called boring, the woman he had mocked, the woman who now owned the world he used to think he belonged in. Yes, Marcus whispered to no one. She wins. He turned back to the wok and started cooking. Back in San Francisco, Sandra walked into her office. On her desk sat a framed photo. It wasn't of money or a building. It was a photo of her in that $20 cardigan, sitting on the court bench. Alistair walked in. Madam, the car is ready. The president is waiting for your briefing. Sandra picked up the photo and placed it face down in the drawer. She didn't need the reminder anymore. Let's go, Alistair, she said, grabbing her coat. We have work to do. The elevator doors closed, sealing the past behind her, and opening to a future that belonged entirely to her. And that is the story of how Sandra Sterling turned her darkest moment into her greatest victory. She taught us that silence isn't weakness, and that sometimes the person you are mocking holds the keys to the castle. Marcus thought he could break her by taking her money, but he didn't realize that she was the currency. What did you think of Sandra's revenge? Was the punishment for Marcus too harsh, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially about that final twist with the USB drive. If you enjoyed this story of justice and high-stakes drama, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We release new revenge sagas every week. Thanks for listening, and remember, be careful who you step on, because you never know who they really are. See you in the next video. The sound of Genevieve Rutherford's laugh was like shattering glass, expensive, sharp, and cold. It cut across the polite murmur of the Metropolitan Charity Gala, freezing Elara Vance in place. My goodness, the Rutherford matriarch sneered, her diamonds catching the light. Julian, darling, look. It's the help we let go. Elara stood alone in a simple, elegant navy dress she'd bought on consignment. Her ex-husband, Julian, and his catty sister, Serafina, looked her up and down with pitying disgust. They saw a woman they had discarded, a poor, forgotten ex-wife. They thought she was a ghost from their past. They were about to find out she was their future. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was the apex of New York's social calendar, a sea of old money and inherited arrogance. Elara Vance had never been invited when she was Mrs. Rutherford. Genevieve had made it clear that Elara, with her community college education and unfortunate background, was not suitable for public display. Tonight, however, Elara was here. Not as a guest of a major family, but as a quiet, anonymous donor from a firm the Rutherfords had never heard of, Vance Strategic Holdings. She had come to observe, to network with people who didn't know her past, and perhaps to measure the distance she had traveled. She was sipping a glass of seltzer water near the grand staircase when she heard the voice that still haunted her nightmares. Well, well, Serafina, cover my eyes. I think I'm seeing a ghost. Elara turned. Genevieve Rutherford stood before her, draped in emeralds, her face a perfect mask of plastic-coated condescension. Beside her, looking profoundly uncomfortable, was Julian, her ex-husband. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had just been shorter when she was with him. On his arm was his new fiancée, Chloe Davenport, a brittle blonde with eyes that calculated everything, and hovering nearby was Serafina, Julian's younger sister, who existed purely to echo her mother's opinions. Elara, Julian managed, his voice a low mumble. He wouldn't meet her eyes. It's Vance, Elara said, her voice quiet but firm. It has been for 5 years. Serafina tittered, a sound like a small, nervous bird. Oh, we know. We just assumed you'd be somewhere else. Like Queens. No offense to Queens. I see you're still wearing navy. Chloe, the fiancée, chimed in, her gaze flicking over Elara's simple dress. It's very safe. Elara's dress was, in fact, a vintage Halston. It was worth more than Chloe's trendy, logo-plastered monstrosity. But it didn't scream money. It whispered class, a language the Rutherfords had forgotten in their quest for status. And you're still wearing Julian, Elara replied, a small, cold smile touching her lips. Also very safe. Chloe's face tightened. Julian flushed crimson, but it was Genevieve who stepped forward, her smile vanishing. You have always been an insolent, ungrateful little thing, Genevieve hissed, her voice low enough that only their small group could hear. Julian gave you a taste of this world. She gestured to the ballroom, the orchestra, the cascades of champagne, and you had the audacity to think you belonged in it. We did you a favor, Ilara. We cut you loose. You should have had the good grace to disappear. Disappear? Ilara repeated. You mean, after you had your lawyers strip me of everything I helped build? After you advised Julian to offer me a settlement that wouldn't even cover a security deposit? You got what you deserved, Serafina snapped, finally finding her courage. You were nothing but a gold digger. Now you're just... digger. Julian remained silent. That was what always broke Ilara's heart. Not the insults, but his silence, his utter, spineless failure to defend her, then or now. I must go, Ilara said, placing her empty glass on a passing tray. It was illuminating, seeing you all again. Do try to find the service exit, dear, Genevieve called after her, the final poisoned dart. It's more your style. Ilara didn't look back. She walked out the grand entrance, her back straight, her heels clicking on the marble. The cold night air hit her face, but it was nothing compared to the ice in her veins. They still saw her as the 22-year-old girl they'd found working in the Rutherford and Sons mailroom. The girl Julian had ruined by marrying against his mother's wishes. The girl they had systematically broken, humiliated, and finally discarded. What they didn't know was that the woman who had just walked away wasn't that girl. That girl was long gone. This woman was Ilara Vance, CEO of Vance Strategic Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in hostile acquisitions of legacy brands. And she had just closed her initial position on her next target. As she stepped into her waiting car, a discreet black Audi A8, not a flashy Bentley, she picked up her phone. David, she said to her COO, we're escalating the timeline. Move on the debt. I want us to own 51% of Rutherford and Sons by the end of the quarter. They're more vulnerable than I thought. The marriage hadn't started as a tragedy. It had started as a corporate fairy tale, or so the few articles that mentioned it had claimed. Ilara, a sharp, ambitious intern in the mailroom of Rutherford and Sons Fine Textiles, had caught the eye of the heir, Julian Rutherford. Rutherford and Sons was an old money institution. For 100 years they had produced the finest silks and wools in New England, but by the time Ilara arrived, they were a dinosaur. Their looms were outdated, their client list was aging, and their entire business model relied on a name that was losing its luster. Ilara, with her natural brilliance for logistics and market trends, saw it all. She'd been promoted to junior analyst within 6 months. She wrote a 40-page proposal on modernizing the company, move into sustainable fabrics, build a direct-to-consumer e-commerce platform, and license the Rutherford name to younger, fresher designers. Julian, then still in his late 20s and charmed by her fire, had championed the idea, and Genevieve had crushed it. We are Rutherfords, she'd said in a board meeting, staring Ilara down. We do not license. We do not build websites. We create heirlooms. This young lady seems to think we're selling T-shirts on a boardwalk. Julian, faced with his mother's iron will, had folded. The proposal was shelved, but his fascination with Ilara remained. He married her a year later, a small, joyless ceremony at City Hall that Genevieve and Serafina forgot to attend. The marriage was a slow-motion prison. Ilara was given the title of Mrs. Rutherford, but was treated like a high-level servant. She wasn't allowed to work at the company. It's unseemly, darling. Her ideas were stolen by Serafina and presented, poorly, as her own. She was mocked at family dinners for her grammar, her clothes, her parents. Julian, consumed by his desire for his mother's approval, grew distant. He was weak, and he hated Elara for seeing it. The divorce, when it finally came after 3 years, was an execution. Genevieve's lawyers from the white shoe firm of Cravath, Swain and Moore painted Elara as a conniving opportunist. With Julian's spineless consent, they enforced a brutal prenuptial agreement that she had been too young and in love to understand. She left the Rutherford mansion with 1 suitcase and a cashier's check for $25,000. It was, Genevieve had informed the lawyer, a generous severance for her services. The first year was hell. Elara moved into a 5th-floor walk-up in a bad part of Brooklyn. The $25,000 was gone in 2 months, eaten by deposits and lawyer fees to fight for anything more she lost. She worked 3 jobs: barista in the morning, data entry in the afternoon, and transcribing medical files at night. She was poor, exhausted, and utterly alone. But the Rutherfords had made one critical miscalculation. They thought that by taking her money, they had taken her power. But Elara's power had never been in money. It was in her mind. The humiliation didn't break her. It forged her. In that tiny apartment, surrounded by medical files, she used her last $500 to buy a used laptop. She started reading. She taught herself to code. She studied corporate finance, debt restructuring, and leveraged buyouts. The anger that burned in her was so cold and so precise that it didn't feel like rage. It felt like focus. She started a small consulting business from her kitchen table. She called it Vance Strategic Solutions. Her first client was a local bakery whose books were a mess. She streamlined their inventory, built them a simple online ordering system, and tripled their profits in 6 months. They paid her in cash and pastries. Her next client was a small logistics company, then a regional hardware chain. She took her fees not in cash, but in equity. She was following the playbook she had written for Rutherford and Sons, but she was doing it for herself. Within 3 years, she had a small, dedicated staff. Her lead analyst, David Chen, was a Wharton graduate who had left a 6-figure job at Goldman Sachs because he believed in her vision. "You don't just read a balance sheet, Elara," he'd said. "You read the future." She changed the name to Vance Strategic Holdings, VSH, and moved into a sleek, anonymous office in a glass tower downtown. VSH began acquiring small, distressed companies: a failing print shop, a textile mill in North Carolina, a defunct software company. She never appeared in the press. She let David be the public face. She lived modestly, drove a simple car, and poured every cent back into VSH. The Rutherfords, with their galas and gossip columns, had forgotten her name. They had no idea that while they were floating on their old leaky ship, Elara Vance was building a submarine. And now, 5 years after the divorce, her submarine was surfacing right beneath them. The executive wing of Rutherford and Sons' fine textiles smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and failure. It's just catastrophic," Julian Rutherford said, his head in his hands. He was staring at the 3rd quarter projections. They weren't just bad. They were an extinction-level event. "Nonsense," Genevieve said, though her voice was tight. She was examining a swatch of new fabric, a hideous damask pattern she had insisted on. "We just need to push the legacy collection. People will pay for quality." "Mother, no one is buying the legacy collection," Julian exploded, a rare show of spine. "Our last order was for a hotel in Dubai, and they cancelled it. They said our patterns were depressing, and our lead times were a joke. They went with a synthetic silk supplier from China." "China," Genevieve scoffed. "Tasteless. Tasteless and profitable," Julian shot back. "We haven't turned a profit in 36 months. The loans from JP Morgan Chase are coming due. The bank is refusing to extend our credit line. We're going to miss payroll." The words hung in the air like poison. Missing payroll wasn't just a financial problem, it was a social one. It was an admission of defeat. "This is her fault," Serafina said suddenly from the corner, where she was scrolling through Instagram. "Elara, this is all her fault." Julian and Genevieve stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Julian asked. She put a curse on us," Serafina said, her eyes wide. "Ever since we saw her at the gala, she was always witchy." "Don't be a moron, Serafina," Julian snapped. "This has nothing to do with Elara. This has to do with us ignoring reality for 10 years. He looked pointedly at his mother, who stiffened. "I will not be spoken to that way, Julian. We are Rutherfords. We will find a way. I will call Arthur Williamson at the bank. He and your father used to play golf." "Arthur Williamson retired 5 years ago, Mother. The person in charge of our account is a 28-year-old VP who thinks Rutherford and Sons sounds like a funeral home." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Rutherford," his assistant's voice quavered. "A Mr. David Chen and a legal team are here to see you. They say it's urgent." "I don't have time for this," Genevieve said, standing up. "I'm going to lunch." "Sit down, Mother," Julian said, his voice flat. "Send them in." David Chen, COO of Vance Strategic Holdings, walked in. He was young, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of polite, lethal competence. He was followed by 3 lawyers who looked like they ate contracts for breakfast. "Mr. Rutherford, Mrs. Rutherford, Ms. Rutherford," David said, nodding to each. "Thank you for seeing us. I represent Vance Strategic Holdings." "Never heard of it," Genevieve sniffed. "You will," David said pleasantly. "VSH is a private equity firm. We specialize in revitalizing legacy brands. And as I'm sure your accountants have told you, Rutherford and Sons is currently in default on several of its largest loans." Julian went pale. "Those discussions are private." "Not anymore," David said, sliding a thick, spiral-bound document across the mahogany table. "As of this morning, VSH has purchased your entire debt portfolio from JP Morgan and your secondary lenders. We are, effective immediately, your sole creditor." Genevieve's face, which had been a mask of boredom, crumpled into confusion. You bought our debt? Why?" "We believe in the brand," David said smoothly, "but not in its current management. The company is insolvent, Mrs. Rutherford. You are hemorrhaging money. As your new creditor, we are here to offer you 2 options." He held up one finger. "Option 1. VSH initiates foreclosure proceedings. We seize the company's assets, this building, your looms, your intellectual property, and liquidate them to cover the debt. You, your family, and your employees are left with nothing. Your family name is publicly ruined." Serafina let out a small, terrified squeak. "And option 2? Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. David smiled, a precise, bloodless expression. "Option 2. VSH acquires Rutherford and Sons, free and clear. We absorb the debt, inject the necessary capital to save the business, and prevent this unfortunate situation from becoming public." You want to buy us?" Julian asked, stunned. "It's a very generous offer," David said. "We will, of course, provide a modest severance for the family to ease the transition." "Get out!" Genevieve said, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out of this office. We will never sell this company. This company was built by my husband's great-grandfather." "Your husband's great-grandfather also used horse-drawn carriages," David said, his politeness fading. "You have 24 hours to accept option 2. If we do not have a signed agreement by 9 or so a.m. tomorrow, option 1 becomes automatic. The foreclosure notices will be filed with the state, and I can assure you the Wall Street Journal will have the story by noon. Have a pleasant day." He and his team stood up and walked out, leaving the stunned, silent Rutherfords in their wake. The fight was brutal and lasted all night. Genevieve was hysterical, Serafina was crying, and Julian was frantically calling lawyers, all of whom told him the same thing. VSH had them. They were legally, financially, and utterly trapped. At 8:45 a.m. the next day, a shaking Julian Rutherford faxed the signed letter of intent to the offices of Vance Strategic Holdings. They were selling the company. "It's done," he said, slumping into his chair. They're sending the new owner to meet with us this afternoon, to discuss the transition." "Who is it?" Genevieve demanded, her eyes red. "Who is this vulture? This Vance Strategic Holdings?" "I don't know," Julian said. "The name on the paperwork is just VSH. The principal is anonymous." The main conference room at Rutherford & Sons was a shrine to a dead era. The walls were dark mahogany, the chairs were heavy leather, and a 20-foot table dominated the room. At the head of the table sat a portrait of the company's founder, Hezekiah Rutherford, looking stern and disapproving. The Rutherford family, Julian, Genevieve, and Serafina, sat on one side of the table, looking like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Julian's fiancée Chloe was there too, perched on a chair by the wall, already looking visibly detached. She hadn't signed up to marry into a former dynasty. Their family lawyer, Mr. Davies, fidgeted with his papers. "They're late," he muttered. "Of course they're late," Genevieve snapped. "It's a power play. These new money corporate raiders. They have no breeding. They probably went to a state school." The main doors of the conference room opened. Julian, expecting David Chen, looked up, and his world stopped. It was Alara. But it wasn't the Alara from the gala. It wasn't the intern from the mailroom. This was a woman he had never seen before. She wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored suit in a deep charcoal grey. Her hair, which she used to wear in a simple ponytail, was cut in a sleek, powerful bob. Her shoes were not flashy, but they were clearly expensive. She was flanked by David Chen and the same team of lawyers from the day before, all of whom carried identical leather briefcases. She radiated an aura of such absolute, terrifying authority that the Rutherfords were struck silent. Alara walked to the head of the table. She paused for a moment to look at the portrait of Hezekiah Rutherford, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. Then she turned to the family. "Good afternoon," she said. Her voice was not the voice he remembered. It was clear, crisp, and devoid of all emotion. Genevieve was the first to find her tongue. What is the meaning of this? Julian, call security. Get this person out of our boardroom." "She can't, Mother," Serafina whispered, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified realization. She must be. With them." "A secretary," Genevieve spat. "Did they send you to take notes, Alara? How fitting." Alara looked at Genevieve. It was a long, patient look, the kind a scientist gives a specimen under a microscope. "Please take your seats," Alara said. It was not a request. She remained standing. She placed her own slim briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "I am Alara Vance," she said, her voice filling the room. "I am the founder, CEO, and sole proprietor of Vance Strategic Holdings." The silence in the room was so complete that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer blow. Serafina's jaw dropped open. Julian made a small, choking sound. Chloe, in the back, sat bolt upright. Genevieve Rutherford just stared, her face a mask of complete, utter disbelief. That's not possible. That's a lie. You're nobody." "I was," Elara agreed, her voice dangerously calm. "You made sure of that. But you have a terrible habit, Genevieve, of underestimating people you consider nobody. It's a fatal flaw." She turned to her lawyer. "Mr. Harris." "The papers." The lawyer stepped forward and placed a thick stack of documents in the center of the table. "As of 9:00 a.m. this morning," Mr. Harris announced, "Vance Strategic Holdings completed its acquisition of 100% of the assets, properties, and intellectual property of Rutherford and Sons. The final transfer of ownership is complete. This company," he nodded to Elara, "now belongs to Ms. Vance." Julian finally looked at her, really looked at her, and all he could see was the ghost of the 24-year-old analyst who had handed him a 40-page proposal, the proposal that would have saved them, the proposal he had let his mother laugh out of the room. "Elara," he whispered. "Why?" Elara turned her full attention to Julian. The air in the room was thick and toxic, filled with the family's disbelief and her own long-simmering ice. "Why?" she repeated, a small, humorless laugh escaping her. "You're sitting in a room dedicated to a man who built an empire on cotton and wool, and you ask why? Because this is what intelligent people do, Julian. We build things. We acquire things. You just inherit them. And you, it turns out, are a very poor steward of your inheritance." "This is revenge," Genevieve hissed, her face purple. "This is a pathetic, petty—" "Do not interrupt me, Genevieve." Elara's voice didn't get louder. It got colder. It was the sound of a vault door closing. Genevieve, for the first time in her life, was stunned into silence. "You speak of revenge," Elara continued, walking slowly along the side of the table. "You think I spent 5 years of my life, built a billion-dollar company, and executed a flawless, multi-year acquisition strategy for you?" She laughed again. "That's the vanity of the Rutherfords. You think the world revolves around you. You think I revolve around you. You were incidental." She stopped in front of Serafina. You were a line item, an inefficiency. You've been drawing a 6-figure salary as Director of Marketing for 5 years. Your only marketing initiative was redesigning the company logo, a project that cost $500,000 and resulted in this. She tapped a letterhead on the table, the logo a garish, unreadable gold scrawl. "It looks like a dying bird." Serafina burst into tears. "I'm telling Daddy." "Arthur Rutherford has no power here," Elara said flatly, referring to their passive, golf-obsessed father. "He signed over his voting shares to Genevieve in 1998. I checked." She moved to Genevieve. You were a liability. You personally blocked the e-commerce transition I proposed in 2017, a move that, by our projections, has cost this company an estimated $80 million in lost revenue. You vetoed the Sustainable Fabrics Initiative. You insisted on pouring money into outdated looms. You, Genevieve, are the single greatest financial disaster to ever happen to this family. You bitch! Genevieve shrieked, lunging across the table. David Chen and one of the lawyers stepped in front of Elara without flinching. Genevieve recoiled as if she'd hit a brick wall. "You're done," Elara said. "All of you. This is no longer your company. This is no longer your boardroom. And as of this moment, you are all terminated. Effective immediately." "Terminated!" Julian yelped, finally finding his voice. "This is our name. You can't fire us from our own name." "Oh, Julian," Elara said, and for the first time, a trace of pity entered her voice. "I'm not just firing you, I'm dissolving you." "What does that mean?" he asked, dread creeping into his voice. "It means Rutherford and Sons is finished. It's a dead brand, toxic and outdated. I have no use for it. As of 9:08 a.m. tomorrow, this entity will cease to exist. Its viable assets, the mills, the suppliers I've already acquired, the remaining staff, will be folded into a new subsidiary of VSH. What's it called? Julian whispered. Ilara smiled. The Vance Textile Group. It was the final, perfect cut. She wasn't just taking their company. She was taking their name. She was erasing them. Genevieve made a sound like she was being strangled. Serafina was sobbing hysterically into her hands. And then a new voice cut through. Well, Chloe Davenport said, standing up from her chair by the wall. She smoothed her skirt and picked up her $10,000 handbag. This has been just fascinating. All eyes turned to her. Julian, darling, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. It seems you have a lot on your plate. My planner is calling, and I simply must take it. We'll talk. Chloe, wait, Julian pleaded, starting to stand up. Don't, Chloe said, holding up her hand. Just don't, it's tacky. She looked at Ilara, a new, sharp respect in her eyes. Ms. Vance. A pleasure. She walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance. She had been engaged to the Rutherford name, not to the man. With the name gone, so was she. Julian sank back into his chair, a broken man. He had lost his company, his name, and his fiancée, all in the span of 10 minutes. Now, Ilara said, her voice all business. Security will escort you from the building. You will be allowed to collect your personal effects from your offices. You have 10 minutes. Your corporate accounts and credit cards have already been deactivated. The fallout was swift and merciless. Termination was a polite word for it. It was an expulsion. When Serafina tried to use her corporate American Express to buy a calming $800 cashmere wrap on her way out, it was declined. Her face, when she realized Ilara meant immediately, was a picture of pale, childish confusion. Genevieve, refusing to be escorted by thugs, tried to call her personal driver. But the driver and the car were company assets. They were no longer hers. She was informed that a taxi had been called for her. The sight of Genevieve Rutherford, queen of New York society, being forced to wait on the curb for a yellow cab was a scene that would be retold by the building staff for years. Julian was the last to leave. He walked through the executive wing, a ghost in his own life. The portrait of Hezekiah was already being taken down. Workers were rolling up the ancient threadbare rugs. Ilara's transition team was moving with terrifying speed. They weren't just remodeling, they were exorcising the Rutherfords. He found Ilara in his former office. She was standing at the great oak desk, the one his father had used, looking at the city skyline. I didn't think it was possible, he said, his voice hoarse. To hate someone so much. Ilara turned, her expression unreadable. This isn't hate, Julian. This is accounting. This is balancing the books. You and your family put me $25,000 in the red. I'm just correcting the balance sheet. And you're satisfied? You've ruined us. You've taken everything. My mother, this will kill her. Your mother is a survivor, Ilara said dismissively. She'll just have to learn to survive on a slightly smaller budget. I've arranged a severance for your family, which you'll find is precisely $25,000 for each of you. Consider it a generous severance for your services. She used the exact words from their divorce settlement. The cut was so deep, Julian flinched. Ilara, He took a step toward her, his face crumbling. I'm sorry. God, Ilara, I am so sorry. I was a coward. I was weak. I still love you. Ilara looked at him, and for a moment, the CEO vanished. He saw the 22-year-old girl he had married. He saw the pain, the betrayal, and the years of lonely work. And then she was gone. No, you don't, Elara said, her voice soft but absolute. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love the power I have. You loved my ideas when you thought they could impress your mother. You are a man, Julian, who has never had a single thought or feeling that wasn't approved by someone else. She stepped away from the desk, walking toward the door. You're pathetic, she said, not with venom, but with clinical finality. And that's worse than being cruel. You're just empty. She left him standing alone in the empty office. He sank into the chair behind the desk, put his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a small boy, he wept. The Rutherford name vanished from the society pages. They sold their mansion in a fire sale to cover the crushing personal debts they had accumulated. Genevieve and Serafina moved into a small, rented condo in Florida, where their names meant nothing. They were just two more bitter old women complaining about the humidity. The new money socialites and old money matriarchs who had once flocked to Genevieve's parties now pretended not to know her. In their world, there was no greater sin than becoming poor. The 6 months that followed were not just a transition. They were a conquest. The name Rutherford and Sons was relegated to the dusty archives of corporate history, a footnote in textbooks about legacy brand failure. In its place, the Vance Textile Group, VTG, exploded into the market. The old building, a tomb of dark mahogany and dying traditions, had been reborn. Elara had flooded the space with light. Walls were torn down, replaced with vast panes of glass. The oppressive silence of the old executive wing was gone, replaced by the energetic, collaborative hum of a company that was actually creating something. The air, which once smelled of lemon polish and old paper, now smelled of fresh brewed high-end coffee, whiteboard markers, and the faint, clean scent of the new fabric prototypes. Elara's original 40-page proposal, once dismissed by Genevieve as a child's fantasy, was now the company's operating Bible. The e-commerce platform launched in 30 days and broke its first-year sales target in 8 weeks, but the true genius was the Vance Sustainable line. Elara hadn't just modernized, she had innovated. She had used VSH capital to acquire 2 small, brilliant biotech firms. The Vance Textile Group wasn't just making silk, it was creating a new, proprietary V-silk, a bio-engineered fiber with the luster of silk, the strength of spiderweb, and a production process that was 100% carbon neutral. High-fashion houses, from Paris to Milan, were in a bidding war for exclusive rights. Elara Vance was no longer an anonymous shark. She was the new face of American industry. The validation of this came on a Tuesday morning. David Chen walked into her office, the vast corner office that had once been Julian's, without knocking. He was holding a magazine, as if it were a religious text. "It's here," he said, his voice reverent. On the cover of Forbes was a full-page, striking photograph of Elara. She was not smiling. She was looking directly into the camera, her expression one of absolute, calm, unshakable authority. The headline in bold white letters read, "The Phoenix, from the mailroom to a billion-dollar throne. Elara Vance didn't just get revenge. She got it all." Elara took the magazine from him. She traced the letters of her name. She felt nothing. No, not nothing. She felt a quiet, cold satisfaction. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally being solved. "They're calling you the Phoenix," David said, smiling. "A bit dramatic, but I like it." "A phoenix burns," Elara said, setting the magazine on her desk. "I didn't burn. I was forged. There's a difference." Her phone buzzed, a dedicated line. She picked it up, gesturing for David to stay. "Stephen, good morning," she said. The voice on the other end belonged to Stephen Schwartzman, the CEO of the Blackstone Group. He was not just an investor. He was a peer. "Elara, I'm looking at your Q4 projections for VTG. You're being conservative," he said, his voice booming. "You're not factoring in the new military contract." "I am," Elara said, leaning back in her chair, her feet on her desk. "I'm just not putting it in the public-facing reports. I prefer to under-promise and over-deliver. It unsettles the competition." Schwartzman laughed. "That's why I like you. Now, about Davos. We need you on the main panel. The future of global supply chains. I'll be moderating." "I'll do it on one condition, Stephen," Elara said, tapping a pen on her desk. "I don't moderate. I lead. I want the closing keynote. My topic is obsolescence. How to kill your own company before someone else does. It'll be a fun presentation." There was a pause. "That's aggressive. I love it. It's yours. Send my people the invoice for the jet." "I have my own," Elara said simply. "See you in Switzerland." She hung up and looked at David, who was grinning. "The Blackstone Group. Just casual," he said. "He's a smart man," Elara said. "He knows which way the wind is blowing." Now, what did the design team say about the new algae fiber? David's desk phone buzzed. His smile faded as he listened to his assistant on the other end. "What is it?" Elara asked. David muted the call. "Elara, you have a visitor. In the lobby. He's refusing to leave." "I don't take unscheduled meetings, David. You know that. Have security remove him." "I would," David said, his voice quiet. "But it's Julian Rutherford." The name hung in the air-conditioned, purified air of the office. It felt alien, a word from a dead language. Elara was silent for a long moment. She looked at the Forbes cover. She looked out the window at the city skyline, a city that now bowed to her. She had erased this man. And yet, here he was, a ghost rattling the chain. "Elara," David said gently, "you don't have to see him. You don't owe him 5 seconds of your time. Let me handle it." "No," Elara said, her voice firm. She stood up and straightened the jacket of her sharp, cream-colored suit. "No, it's time to close this account. Send him up." David hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." Elara waited, not at her desk, but standing by the great wall of windows. She heard the chime of the private elevator, the whisper of the doors. She heard the hesitant, shuffling footsteps on the new, light oak floors. "You can go in, sir," David's assistant said, her voice full of pity for this strange, sad man. Julian Rutherford walked into the office. The man who entered was not the man she had known. The old Julian, for all his weakness, had been polished. He had been draped in the effortless, expensive armor of inherited wealth. This Julian was a ruin. He was thin, his skin a pale, unhealthy grey. He wore a suit, but it was a cheap, synthetic blend, a size too large in the shoulders and shiny at the elbows. It was the suit of a man trying and failing to look professional. His shoes were scuffed. His hair was thinning. But the worst part was his eyes. The old, lazy arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate, pleading terror. He stopped in the middle of the vast room, looking around at the light, the art, the energy. He was a creature of shadow, and the brightness of her world seemed to physically hurt him. "Elara," he said. His voice was a dry rasp. This place, it's incredible." "Julian," she replied. Her voice was not cold, it was not warm, it was neutral. It was the voice she used for a quarterly earnings call. "You shouldn't be here." I know, he said, taking a half step forward. He looked at the Forbes magazine on her desk. "I saw that. At At a newsstand. He gestured to his cheap suit. I've been working at a regional insurance firm, in their processing center, data entry. The irony was so thick, Ilara almost smiled. He was literally in a version of the hell he had relegated her to. It's in a basement, Julian whispered, the words tumbling out of him now. The lights, they flicker, they hum. All day, I type numbers. All day, no one knows my name. They call me Jim. I tried to correct them, but they didn't care. He looked up at her, his eyes filling with tears. My mother, she's in Florida, in a small condo. She doesn't speak, she just sits on the balcony and stares at the ocean. She hasn't said my name in months. Serafina. She just cries. She blames me for everything, for losing the name, for losing this. He gestured around the room again, and she's right, I did lose it. Why are you here, Julian? Ilara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I saw the magazine, he said, pointing to it. And I read about the V-silk, the sustainable fabrics, the whole plan. He took another shaking step. Ilara, that was your plan, the one you wrote, the one I let her. He couldn't finish the sentence. He just choked on it. I was wrong, he finally managed. God, Ilara, I was so wrong. I was a fool. I was a coward. I was weak. And I'm so sorry. I am so sorry for what I did to you, for what I let them do to you. I accept your apology, Ilara said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. No, wait, please! He surged forward, stopping just short of her desk, a beggar before a throne. Please, Ilara, I can't do this. This life, this emptiness. I'm not meant for it. He looked up, his face a mask of total abject self-pity. Give me a job, he pleaded. Ilara's expression didn't change. A job. Anything at all. I know this business. I grew up in it. I know the looms. I know the suppliers. What you've done, it's genius. It's everything I wanted the company to be, but I was too weak to fight my mother. Let me help you. I'll run the mailroom. I swear to God, Ilara, I'll run the mailroom. I'll sort the mail. I'll get the coffee. I don't care. I need to be in here. I need to be a part of this. A part of you. There it was. The pathetic, parasitic truth. Ilara studied him for a long, silent minute. She saw the pathetic circular logic of his life. He was a man defined by the strong women he clung to. First his mother, now her. He didn't want a job. He wanted a host. She walked slowly from the window and sat down in her chair. The high-backed leather chair. She steepled her fingers, her gaze analytical. He flinched, as if expecting her to yell. He was still waiting for his mother's rage. Julian, she began, her voice calm and surgical. You're not here for a job. You're here for an identity. You've never had one of your own. Your entire life, your identity, was Rutherford. It was a name you didn't earn, a company you didn't build, and a power you didn't know how to wield. When I took that name, you didn't just become poor, you became extinct. No, Ilara, You talk about love, she continued, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. You don't love me. You're confusing love with awe. You're confusing desire with desperation. You see what I've built, and you want to attach yourself to it. You are a vine, Julian. You cannot grow on your own. You can only cling. You clung to your mother's power, and it poisoned you. Now you want to cling to mine. She leaned forward. And you offer to run the mailroom. You say it as if it's some grand, noble sacrifice, as if it's your final, poetic humiliation. She shook her head, a small, pitying smile on her lips. "Julian, I ran that mailroom. It is a real job, a hard job. The young woman who runs my mailroom now has a degree in logistics and is training to move into operations. The people who work for her are smart, they are ambitious, they are hungry. They are all the next me." She stood up, the full power of her new station radiating from her. "You are not qualified for that job. You are not hungry. You are not ambitious. You are just the last you. You are a bad investment, a liability. And if I have learned one thing, it's to cut liabilities from my portfolio. Permanently." He was gaping at her, the blood draining from his face. The last, desperate spark in his eyes was dying. "So no, Julian. The answer is no. Not because I hate you. I don't. I truly don't feel anything for you at all. The answer is no because I am a CEO, and this is a business. There is no place for you here." What am I supposed to do?" he whispered, a lost child. Elara walked to her desk and pressed the intercom. "David, I'm ready." She looked back at Julian. "You do the one thing you were built for. Go to Florida. Your mother and sister are waiting. You are all that is left of each other. You built that tiny toxic raft together. Now you have to float on it." The office doors opened, and David Chen walked in. "Mr. Rutherford," he said, his voice polite but firm. "This way." Julian looked at Elara one last, pleading time. She had already turned away. She was looking at her computer screen, at the Q4 projections. He didn't protest. The fight was gone. The man was hollow. He let David gently, but firmly, guide him from the room. Elara Vance watched his reflection in the glass as he was escorted to the elevator. She watched the door slide shut, swallowing the last ghost of her past, the final, pathetic remnant of the House of Rutherford. She did not smile. She did not weep. She felt no rush of victory. She felt closure. The account was balanced. The book was closed. She picked up her phone. "Sarah," she said to her assistant, "get the design team in my conference room in 5 minutes, and get me a double espresso." She looked at the Forbes cover one last time, then slid it into a drawer. She was Elara Vance, and she was just getting started. Elara Vance's story isn't just about revenge. Revenge is a fire that burns out. This is a story about resilience, the kind that builds an empire from the ashes of humiliation. The Rutherfords made the classic mistake. They thought that by controlling someone's present, they could own their future. But they forgot that the most dangerous person is the one with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Elara didn't just get even. She got everything. What did you think of Elara's ultimate comeback? Let me know your favorite part of her story in the comments below. If you were inspired by her incredible journey from the mailroom to the boardroom, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive, undeniable success. And of course, if you want more true life stories of drama, karma, and ultimate justice, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.